You're listening to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas had a great time at NAB this year, connecting with professionals across media, post-production, and broadcast. They've launched a limited-time NAB sale around the event, offering 50% off their catalog of professional sound effect libraries. Due to strong interest, that sale has now been extended for a limited time. So even though NAB is wrapped, there's still a chance to take advantage of the savings, but not for long. You can check out the extended sale at sound-ideas.com. Hey everyone, this is Tim, and we have a really wonderful episode for you today. I'll be talking to Paul Cole and Gavin Fernandez from the hit series One Piece, Season 2. This episode was recorded as part of AirCon 26, the amazing, completely free, and entirely online audio conference put on by the folks at airwiggles.com. I want to throw a large amount of thanks and appreciation to Lewis Thompson and Greg Lester and the rest of their team for pulling off another amazing edition of AirCon. I'm already looking forward to next year's version. If for some reason you missed attending AirCon this year, I believe most, if not all, the talks will be available online soon. You can check out aircon26.com regularly to find out when they will go up. I want to thank everyone that attended this panel talk live. The chat was very active during the talk, and the questions from the audience were all great. I know I had a blast at both the panels that I moderated. The other one was a really fun talk about sound guilds and what they can do for you. I hope that one day that talk will also become a Tonebenders episode. I have a quick announcement to make. I will be hosting and moderating a free screening of Independence Day to mark the film's 30th anniversary with some of the sound crew that worked on the film in attendance. This will take place in Toronto on July 6th, starting at 6 p.m. at the Hot Docs Theatre. After the screening, I will talk with the film's supervising sound editor, Val Koklowski, Foley artist Andy Malcolm, and sound effects editor Mark Lanza about their work on this groundbreaking film. Go to the link in the description for this episode and use the code VFF Tonebenders to claim your free seats and entrance to the post-screening party as well, where there'll be complimentary bites and refreshments. I teamed up with the Vaughan Film Festival last year for a Back to the Future anniversary screening at this same venue, and it was truly a magnificent night. So I expect this one to be even better, so come on out if you can make it. Okay, let's get to the point. Here is my talk with Paul and Gavin from Season 2 of One Piece, recorded live as part of AirCon 26. Hello and welcome to AirCon 26 and the Tonebender Sound Design Podcast, where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. My name is Tim Muirhead, and I will be your host today as we talk about the hit Netflix series One Piece Season 2. It's a swashbuckling adventure that started as a comic, then lived for a long time as an animated series before going to live action on Netflix. And today we have the re-recording mixer and supervising sound editor from Season 2 to talk to us about how they tackled this sound design heavy, fantastical adventure. So let's meet them. First up, we have Gavin Fernandez, One Piece's re-recording mixer, based in Montreal. This is Gavin's third time on Tonebenders. It's great to have you back, Gavin. Great to see you.
My pleasure to be here. What an honor.
It's our honor to have you. Also with us is Paul Cole, supervising sound editor. Paul works out of Montreal as well, and somehow this is Paul's first time on Tonebenders. It will be the first of many, I suspect. Welcome to the show, Paul. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having us, Tim. Really happy to be here.
Perfect.
Yes, first time. I'm a little shy for some of these interviews, so that may have something to do with it.
We'll go easy on you. Don't worry. This show, One Piece, is based on an extremely popular source material from the original comics to the series to season 1 of the show, which you guys did not work on, I don't think. How did you jump onto a moving train like this for season 2 with all of the sound intense scenes? Maybe Paul, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I mean, there was some whiplash for sure. We've done a lot of great projects in the city, but we haven't really tackled anything of this magnitude before. So when the call came in, it came in through some connections through Steve Gurman, who's the owner operator of Premium Sound, and he knows Steve Wilkie, who's the post producer of One Piece, and Gavin had worked with Steve before, so the calls all came around. And at some point I received the call, said, "Hey, are you interested in this kind of show?" And I said, "Yeah, let's dive into it." I didn't really know much about the One Piece universe before getting into it. And then as soon as I started scratching the surface, I was like, "Oh my God, like this is massive. This is huge. Like the fan base, like the manga, the anime, just like, like oceans of content, oceans of super devout fans." And I was like, "All right, let's go. Let's do it." So no, there was definitely some whiplash at the beginning. When we started the first conversations of stuff, we were like, well, how much do we carry from season one? What's, like, are we trying to reinvent things? Are we trying to keep the boat in the same direction? And so that was a lot of the first early calibration, was trying to figure out, like, what's the line to ride? Do we want to propose a lot of new things? Do we want to revisit things that already been established? And the answer was kind of somewhere in between.
How long did you work on it for? What was the schedule for this?
Oh man, it was long. So when we first got the call, the first things that we worked on sound design wise was actually Laboon's vocals. That was kind of our interview, let's say. So they were like, we have this scene, and it was still at the script stage. They hadn't really shot anything, and the director wanted to play a lot of these sounds back on set, because they had built these massive sets.
Sorry, Laboon's the giant whale, right?
That's right. Sorry, yeah, I should specify. And so they were like, we're going to be playing these back on set. We're going to shoot these scenes in a couple of weeks. Can we pre-design some enormous whale calls? The size of the Empire State Building. We're going to be inside the whale. We're going to be outside the whale. And I was like, yeah, let's try it. And so we developed a bunch of different kinds of tonal things. We wanted to get some expressivity. We knew that this whale was supposed to be intelligent, so we kind of had our laundry list of things we had to accomplish with these sounds. And we designed some stuff, and we sent those off, and they ended up being played back on set. And some of that stuff made it to the final thing, not all of it, but once you see the thing, we kind of had to change gears a little bit, because it was a lot bigger and a lot more expressive than we had imagined.
Gavin, do you want to talk about your first thoughts? Did you have to go and watch season one to figure out how they
definitely had to go watch season one, and definitely had to open my mind to that whole world. I don't know that whole manga world, and so I really came into it kind of blindly. I was shocked, amazed, and marveled at the size of it, the scope of it, and how keen these fans were. Because Paul was giving me information about, getting feedback on that's not the way it should be, and that's like there were all these flavors, and we had a couple of experts on it. Nick was there from the producers, and they are sort of right next to Oda in how to tell this story and how to convert this into the live action anime. And it was almost like doing, we'd done an IMAX movie years ago, which was Journey to Mecca, and we got called on stuff that was scripturally or religiously incorrect, and we had to modify the film accordingly. It almost felt like that to some extent, was that there was a whole universe in which you're not allowed to turn left at that corner, and you're not allowed to do this. And so I had to learn that language. I think Paul was a little bit quicker at doing it, and he'd been in it for months more than me. Well, yeah, but you'd already been immersed in all those discussions with the exec producer team. And so it was kind of like, whoa, there are a lot of constraints on this other than what's happening in the mix room. And there was a little bit of a push towards, hey, this year we want to take it to the next level. And so we're really pushing hard on all the Atmos elements and spinning stuff around the room. And then when we got into the approval process, which was literally 4 months down the road, 3 months, we were already 4 months. I started in June last year. We didn't deliver an episode until January.
Whoa.
They were all live at the same time in different degrees of completion. Laboon, which is the second episode in the series, was one of the last ones we finished because of the visual effects. And these a lot of the visual effects came with picture conforms and all that. So it was a long process for us to get there, but it was a lot of stuff to learn up front. And then it took a while to settle in, and once we settled in, it was a little bit easier to try and sort of extrapolate to what they're going to want in the final product. But there wasn't a lot. I know, Paul, you correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there was a lot of last year we did this, or it was really based on the mix they were hearing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was based on feeling. I think there was a lot of the canonical, as you said, the tenets that we couldn't really challenge. And that was something that was really helpful to have these experts on board, because they'd be coming in and say, For example, like Brooke, he has got this trademark laugh. It's like yo ho 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 ho, and like we had done a version that was a who at the end, not a ho, and they were like whoa 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 whoa, no 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 no, it has to be a ho ho ho, not a hoo hoo hoo. And I was like, okay, and then like what was crazy is like when we were watching, I was reading some of their fan reactions, and they were like, they got his laugh right. So I think there are a lot of those ingredients that the fans like are. It's very important to keeping the authenticity alive for fans of the show. But one of the challenges that I had found, and maybe Gavin you found too, was like, we're trying to do a live adaptation of something that is based on drawings and then an anime, and what works for a live action thing doesn't always work for those other elements, and vice versa. And so to talk back about season one, one thing that they really established well that we did stick to a lot was one of the first conversations I had with the producers. They're like, we don't want this to be cartoony. Like visually, there's a lot of flamboyance. A lot of the costumes are very, very loud, and the wigs are kind of oversized, and a lot of the gags are kind of very physical kind of comedy. And they're like, but we can never lean into this sounding cartoony. It needs to sound grounded. They don't want it to sound too Kill Billy, with too much gore. But they also, it needs to play as a live action. And so that was one of the bigger challenges, was like, okay, well, how do we do service to the visuals and the storytelling and all this kind of everything's over the top, like Luffy's, the devil fruit powers, they're wacky, they're zany. And, the approach was always, we need to stay grounded. Like, what would that actually sound like? Not like, what's this kind of through the lens of a cartoon or the lens of like, a sound designer's playground. Like, so there wasn't a lot of like leeway in terms of like, let's imagine what that could sound like. It's like, no, like, what do we see? And how do we make that as believable as possible to the audience? And that was something that I thought season one did a really great job of. And we kind of carried that torch for season two. And yeah, I mean, the only other difference I think season one, season two was like one of the conversations we had early on, they're like, season one, there's a lot of elements where it's kind of like through the eyes of a child. There's a lot of elements where Luffy's in his childhood and he's kind of discovering the magic of the world of One Piece. And so there's a lot of elements that kind of lean into this kind of, I don't know, magical whimsy sometimes, like when he finds a devil fruit, there's kind of this like magical thing. That's something that we like really didn't do at all in season two. And anytime we did kind of err into that department, I say error only because the producers, they didn't want that. Anytime we went there, they're like, no magic, no sparkle, no whimsy, none of that kind of that sound designers kind of tinkly stuff. It was very much like, we need this to feel violent. We want this to feel like a more mature season than season one because the group is more mature. Like the season one, they're kind of getting their bearings, and season two is kind of their first real adventure as a team, and the stakes are higher. And so I think the producers wanted the soundtrack to reflect that a lot. And so that was where we went. And, it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of, I hope it came across. Hope people didn't find it too cartoony at moments, because we really tried not to be. But yeah, no, we really tried hard to make it as believable as possible considering the circumstances.
There was a lot of times where we were really chasing the comments from the producers. Like it was, you're doing some very fantasy picture image related stuff, and then they'd use words like, oh, it's got to sound organic, and we're going, organic? This doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. And yeah,
that was the fun of it, though. For me, it was like, I feel like once you kind of just like subscribe that this is real, and you're trying to make it as believable as possible, you end up finding that line where it's like, okay, like this could never happen in the real world, but if it were to have happened, this is what it would sound like. At least this is what we think it would sound like. So that was always the line we're trying to ride. Luffy's head pops off his head, and we're like, okay, come on. Like, there's no way we can make this sound realistic. But then, I think we got pretty close, actually.
Yeah. Or the other one was remember there was a whole, like, there were a lot of stuff. There's some stuff that got unfortunately left by the wayside. So there's one thing at one point where Miss All Sunday jumps off the boat, but she can't land in the water because she loses her devil powers. And so it was like, okay, she's landing on a turtle, and it's like clunk, but you never saw any of that. And so she jumps off into the water, but you hear clunk, and it takes a while, and then you have to play it out for everyone to hear it and say, yeah, great. in theory, but not necessarily working in execution. So just the silence will make it the magic happens.
Yeah, remember we did that, and like we're like, that's probably what a sea like jumping onto an oversized sea turtle would sound like.
Your
But the
sounds
problem
are
is that
perfect.
now it sounds like she's jumping onto like a stunt balloon, which is what actually happened on set. So we're like, yeah, maybe sometimes reality is overrated, you know? So
Yeah,
we just killed it.
yeah.
One of my favorite sequences in this season, Zorro takes on 100 people in a never-ending sword battle. It's episode 3.
Episode
Yeah.
3. Yeah.
Sword battles are super hard for sound design. One of the problems is there's a lot of tonal sounds in it, so it can get lost in the music. It's also a lot of metal clinky clinks. How do you make them sound interesting? You did a great job on this sequence because it sounds amazing. Paul, take it first. Do you want to talk about your kind of philosophy on sword battles, sound design?
I don't know if I have a philosophy about it. I got to give a lot of credit to my sound designer, my co-sound designer and sound editor, Matt Sarantola. So that was actually the first episode we worked on, was episode 3, because that was the one that was surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly to a ton of viewers, the least VFX heavy. Almost everything that happens in that episode, with the exception of those cactuses that we see, the cacti in the background, it's all practical. And so when we got the network cut and the picture lock, it was like, that's, they had to paint out some wires, they had to paint out some stuff, but like for the most part, the action, the episode was there. We could see all, Zorro did that. Like the actor, McKenna, he did that. Like all those things, like all the rolls, all the jumps, all like that was all him. And so we had that all from day one, which is great. So I was like, all right, Matt, let's take a stab at the sword scene. And so, him and I, we did some research into different types of sword sounds. There's a couple different categories of sword sounds happening in that episode. There's like kind of the classic, slash and fighting scenes, which there's like 100 of those, as you said in the episode. The big challenge with those ones was that they get repetitive really fast, and so if you watch a lot of like, old kung fu movies, a lot of it's just the same sound of it. It's like ching, 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 ching. And it gets kind of, there's a style in that, but it kind of gets repetitive. And we weren't going for that. We weren't going for like a wuxia kind of thing. We wanted it to be its own thing. And so I was like, let's try it, take a stab at it. I actually have a bunch of katanas from my childhood being
Wow.
a sword geek. So we took those swords, we did some recordings. Turns out katanas don't actually sound like what you expect they do at all. They sound pretty dull and uninteresting. So we didn't really use a lot of that stuff. But for the majority, we used a lot of just like metal shanks, stuff like that. And the challenge was just keeping it interesting. A lot of it came from just following what was happening on screen because, they did a really good job with the choreography of the fight where Zorro wasn't just doing the same kind of fight every time, the same kind of hits. He was going with a guy, he'd attack a guy in the stairs that had dual, big, I don't know what you call them, kind of, Arabic swords. And then he would kill him. And then there's a guy on top that had a big long sword. And then he would disarm him and throw the sword across. So there's a lot of this kind of like dynamic sword play that was already built into the picture. So, our first line of attack was let's just follow what we see. And then once we do that, we'd reflect on it and say, okay, this sounds kind of boring or sounds kind of repetitive, or it feels like we're kind of just hearing the same thing over and over again. How do we make this more interesting? There's a lot of little details in there that you would like never ever pick up if you're trying to listen for them. But I think they're the kind of invisible sounds that just like make one thing slightly different than the next. So we did a lot of like Doppler on sounds too. So like whenever there was a sword that was flying past, Zorro would disarm somebody or whatever, a sword would fly across the screen, we would add some kind of Doppler sound. So it's not just a sword shing, it's a sword shing that has a bit of, some kind of modulation to it. And that was kind of for the classic swords. Talk a bit more about, then at some point Zorro starts experimenting with his evil sword, the Sandai Katetsu, the red one. That was a fun one. So they were like, when we had our spotting session with the producers, they're like, what does an evil sword sound like? And I was like, I have no idea, but I'll try something, And when I was kind of scratching my head about it, I was like, I was looking at different kind of resonances and different tonalities. I actually had done some recordings from a previous project that never saw the light of day, where it was like these tuning forks that are actually tuned to body frequencies, like they're healing tuning forks, more like Ayurvedic, more so than like musical frequencies. And what's cool about that is like I had like a set of 12 of them, and when they're like, so it's like 932 hertz and 627 hertz. So like they're kind of weird frequencies. And what's cool is when you hit two together, they pulse in weird ways. Like they have that constructive interference kind of thing, but it's in a way that's not really musical. it just feels a little bit off. And so I was kind of playing with them, and I found a combination of two that felt kind of dark and atonal and had this kind of resonance that didn't feel like a hero sound. It felt kind of more like a villain sound. So I did a bunch of recordings of these kind of. I'd hit them and I'd swirl them around. I actually have them here. I can maybe play those later for you guys. But it's I'd move them around the microphone, and I'd wind them up on a string and release them so it would start spinning really fast while I was hitting it, and that made a really cool like kind of sound. And then you put those through Doppler and other processings, and that kind of was like the base of like the shing of that sword. And I cut that all together, and I was like, it's cool, but it's still missing evilness. Like, it feels atonal, but not evil. And so I was like, it needs a voice. Like, this thing just needs to have some kind of spiritual, like there's like a demon trapped in the sword. So, all sound designers as a first resort or last resort sometimes picked up a microphone, and I was like, let's just do some vocal weird, noises. And so I did a sound, and it was like a kind of like a whispery, snaky, almost like a something that would have belonged in like the Harry Potter giant snake kind of scene. And I took that and I pitched it up so it was a little bit more in this upper frequency range, and then I layered that in. So whenever he draws the sword, you hear or whenever he pulls it out of one of his opponents, it's like you hear this kind of burst of and this kind of the shing that's this kind of atonal thing. So that was fun. And, like we do all that, and then we go to the playback, and I was nervous because like they really wanted me to like make this evil sound design or this evil sword. And we go to playback, and we just pass through the scene. Nobody commented at all. And I was like, okay, I guess it works. Like if producers don't even, if they just believe it, then that's a good sign. It means
Definitely.
we at least got pretty close to the target. So
Gavin, do you want to talk about mixing sword sounds? They got to be a challenge on the faders. Well, you answer, Paul. Go get those tuning fork things.
Okay,
Gavin, go.
Yes. So it's going to take him 2 seconds. It's right next to so for me, I mean, it was there are two aspects to it. So there's the obviously the storytelling aspect to it, and a lot of that's bigger. And then there's the whole technical aspect of it with loudness, because they're sword fights are a very transient sound. The last time I did really big sword battles, I was actually doing temp mixes for one of the Highlander movies back in 1990 something. I'm the old guy, right? And so we were working on analog tape. The analog tape took care of all the peak limiting, whereas with now working in digital medium, it was always a whole different aspect to it. So it was really a lot of the finding the right amount of containment so that it was technically okay and sonically impactful still. Paul's always gave me multiple sounds, so I always had a depth to go for fatter or thinner or sharper or higher pitch or lower pitch. And so there was I didn't spend a lot of time undoing his original balance, but if I needed to go somewhere, all that stuff was all there right off the bat. So that was fantastic for that and made my life a lot easier. There was a lot of the sword battles for me. My first thing, one of my main rules in re-recording mixing is before you touch the EQ, before you touch the compressor, before you add reverb or anything, is spatialize it. So the pan pot is my first sonic movement. So as soon as you start getting, if you've got multiple sword fights going on, as soon as you start panning stuff to where they are in the picture, it opens up all the channels for other sounds going on there. And you don't have to turn them as loud because they're not one on top of the other. And so definitely the panning is critical to that, and takes a certain amount of time to get all that done, because each sword could be made up from 2 or 3 whooshes, and then 2 or 3 or 4 impacts, and so, or slings, and then impacts at the thing. So it's sort of like that whole, I don't know if everybody knows the Saving Private Ryan movie, when they did that opening battle scene, which was a real one. They said every event is a 3-part event. It's a gunfire or a cannon going off. It's a whoosh by of the bullet or the projectile, and then it's an impact, be it on water or metal or wood or humans. And so so that sort of thing was very much what Paula did. I don't think it was intentionally done like that, but that's very much the elements that we had. We had a beginning,
it wasn't intentionally done.
Well, what I meant was you weren't always saying it's a 3-part.
No, that's true.
That's what I'm talking about. It makes it a lot easier when it's already broken up into that, but each one of those have to be treated because the whooshes are moving through the XYZ plane, whereas the impacts and the other stuff are usually fairly static in location. So it takes the time it takes to put it in place, but there was more than enough material, and I think you hear it, and then it's the real battle happens is what can we play up, and then we've still got this huge 60-person orchestra over the top of it, so it was really the real battle in most of these scenes was, okay, where is the effect taking the lead, and where's the music taking the lead? Because if it's heavy percussion and stuff like that, that's in direct competition with things like sword impacts. And so there was a little bit of massaging, and sometimes it probably got a little bit too. Everybody was playing at once in some of those scenes, and then it was usually based after comments with the producers or whatever, where he said, okay, we really have to, unfortunately the sound effects really have to take a backseat here because we have to get this percussive element through, and then it's like, okay, now the music has to take a backseat, and I think we did it. I mean, it was a lot of carving in a lot of departments, more so than in most other films. Like there'd be times where, okay, the brass is going to have to take a deep dive, or the percussion is going to have to take a deep dive to let this other element play through, with letting the rest of the orchestra still stay on top, and then vice versa with the sound effects, where sometimes Paul had some absolutely amazing sounds, but they didn't get to sit on top of certain sections because the score, or often, I mean, a lot of it, there is a lot of dialogue in this film. There's a ton of information in every line delivered, and so that was sometimes the bigger issue. So
there's a cool story to segue, Gavin, from that. It's not about episode 3; it's actually episode 1. The Miss All Sunday introduction, when she's going down the hallway and she's killing all the people with her arms. This was a cool example of a moment when we first got that scene, and the VFX were all temp. For people that haven't seen it, it's a scene when basically Miss All Sunday, she's walking down the hallway and she's sprouting arms out of all these Marines and the arms kill those Marines. And there's massive score on top of it, and the arms, there's a choreography to them where the arms, there's a growth, there's a explosion, and then the explosion turns into flower petals. And so then on top of that, we had all the screaming from everyone dying. We had all the weapons and sounds. And so it was just like, it was a absolute smorgasbord of sounds. Like we had way too many, but we needed to put it all in there. And then we're like, how do we mix this? What do we do? And so to touch on Gavin's, what he was saying about, sometimes we have to make a lot of choices. We did a couple passes on that scene. And then ultimately, actually, first time in my career I've seen this happen, we ended up getting in touch with the VFX department, and we're like, you know what we're gonna do? Like, it wasn't our idea; it was Steve Welke, who was our boss. He was like, we're gonna time all of the arm explosions to the percussive beats of the music. So it's not every single beat, but basically every single arm explosion was going to be on rhythm with the music. And that came very late in the process. So we had done 3 or 4 versions of the scene. And then at the end, that was the thing that actually glued it all together. So it was like, okay, now we're going to move all the arms. And so we did it actually in reverse. Steve was like, okay, Paul, move all of your arm explosions onto on beat, basically. Just put them somewhere on the rhythm, and then we're going to do VFX to your explosions. So we did sound design that then we had to send to the VFX department, and then they would put the arm explosions on those beats. And then at the end, when you play it all together, it's like, drum beats, like bum, 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 pop, 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 bum, bum, pop, 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 pop. And like, it really just ended up being this really cool syncopated thing, where all departments are kind of playing on the same team instead of trying to compete with each other. And that scene in particular, I don't think it would have worked if we hadn't done that. So that's just another example of sometimes we've got to get creative to make space for everything, because musicians are firing on all pistons. That scene, sound design was firing on all pistons, and visuals were firing on all pistons, and we had to find a way to make it all work.
I don't know if you remember Steve's comment from one of the playbacks from our day 4 playback or whatever, and he's like, okay, and after the third one, just turn all that stuff down, because if you heard one person die, you've heard them all die.
And he was right, honestly. Like, you don't, after that first big one on center screen, you're like, yeah, I don't really need to hear like these death gurgles anymore. They were great sounds. The Luke group did amazing work on this show. But yeah, unfortunately, that's often the first domino to fall, when we're trying to carve out space.
Hey, Paul, you got those tuning forks out now? Let's get a demo.
Just pick two random ones. This is let's see. This is 174 hertz and 852 hertz. Let's just see what happens. So this is and I got two other ones here just to see. 528 and 376.
Ooh, that one's more evil.
That's it. So yeah, I don't know. I don't remember which ones I used. I wrote it in the metadata of the sound, but I had done all sorts of iterations, and I found one that was like, that sounds evil, and then that kind of informed what I did for afterwards.
That's very cool. Thank you for the demo.
I said you should use that mic for all the recordings.
No, I actually use an ambisonic mic when I did it, so I could get like a 5.1.
Oh, very
kind
cool
of spatial thing.
Gavin, in episode 4, I think they go to an island that has giants on it. Do you want to talk about your approach to processing the voices of the giants?
Well, a lot of that happened on Paul's end, actually, so he could probably talk to more because a lot of that went through an approval process. I can tell you that even though it went through an approval process, we ended up almost all the processing, King Wapple, almost all of it, all the speaker phones for the snails and all that, almost all of it got dialed back a good 20-30% on top of that. Once they got to the thing, even though the process definitely worked to marry it to the picture, we had to dial it all back so that it became a little bit more I don't know, world eyes is friendly for everybody, that were all the listeners and stuff like that. I think the real keeners would have all gotten into it at the higher mix percentage, but I will say that. So Paul, you're the one who came up with the most of the process.
Yeah, this show had a lot of vocal processing requests. I wouldn't say requests, but needs. There's a lot of characters where it's not supposed to sound like a normal sized person. You've got Chopper, you've got Heavy Point Chopper, you've got the Giants. I'm probably forgetting a couple others right now, but in my experimentation with that, I was like, I tried some fancy stuff at first. I was like, I'm going to do some kind of saturator. I'm going to do a multiband where I'm muting an entire section. So it's like a weird, just bassy voice with the uppers thing. And I thought it was kind of cool, but like, as soon as I played it for them, they were like, no, like this sounds processed. It sounds like, basically the MO was like, don't go too far. And so, yeah, as Gavin said, we ended up dialing everything back a lot. To the point where one point they're like, remove all the processing. And I was like, okay, let's just play it dry. And I'll just want you to see what it sounds like. And we played, the Giants, for example, originally they were like, they didn't like the processing. So like, get rid of all of it. And so I played it back at just like what was recorded on set. And they just sounded like two dudes, it was just like, and they did great performances, but it's like, they just couldn't get deep enough, because a normal human's voice can't go deep enough to really get that resonance or that pitch that we're trying to hit to make it stick to image. And so as soon as I played it for them, they're like, okay, no, put some back. And so that was a good little experiment, just to be like, are you sure you want that? Okay, now we go somewhere in between. And the end result, I think it was actually pretty simple. Like we pretty much just lowered we did some pitching. I think it was like 4 semitones.
And then the spatialization was different. So whereas everybody else was pinpoint and mostly center speaker, they were diverged into the left, center, right. There was an element of reverb on it. In one of the first passes, we got rid of that pretty quickly because it was distracting people. There was a certain element of sub on there. So there's some LFE being fed in from the voices, from a subharmonic synthesizer. That's about it. Yeah, we dialed back a lot of the pitch change. We came probably about halfway back to reality from what it was originally. I liked it deeper. I mean, a lot of stuff that Paul did was fantastic, but it was once it got to a larger number of years, it was just sort of like, can we just find a happy ground for everybody? So it was, and there were a lot of, this was how many people were on the playback, Paul? 15 on every playback?
Something like that. Yeah, there was a lot.
So,
there's a lot of voices in the room. So, you're trying to do your best to make everybody as happy as possible, including yourself. So there's sometimes when we're like, forget about it. We're just going to go with what everybody wants. And there's sometimes you're like, I think this one's worth fighting for. There's some stuff we left, like originally Wapple, we had pitched his voice down and we had put him through, I had done this kind of like temp processing of like putting him through this like, an IR, like an impulse response of like this metal can, so that his voice had this kind of short metallic resonance. And we had done the jaw squeak and we did all that stuff. And then we played it back for the producers and they're like, no. This is not what we had in mind. And so we're like, you know what? let's just kill it. And so I think none of that made it to the final mix. I think
Yeah, my Altiverb made it through. My
your Altiverb. Okay, so there was a little bit.
Altiverb with the washing machine drum.
Okay. So some survived.
Yeah. So that was
That being said, but in these moments, you can't take it personally. Like these people, they've been living in the show for years. They've been thinking about it, they've been editing it. Like it's not my baby. It's not my responsibility to say this is how it's going to be. I propose options, I do what I think I like and what I think the audience is going to like, and if they don't like that, then that's just fine. It's that's just part of the job. So I think a lot of these we'd pick certain battles that were like, I think this one really is going to sound weird if we don't do it, or it's going to sound like a mistake if we don't do it. But you try not to let your ego get caught up, trying to think about, oh, I spent a week doing this one cool thing and now nobody likes it. So I think it's just a question of staying humble in those moments.
If any of you audio nerds have friends in medical research, come to the season 3 mixes and you can watch Paul and I have real-time aneurysms.
Another sound design moment that I really loved is when Smoker turns into smoke and shoots his smoke around. That's a really hard thing to design because it requires movement. You can't just have a static sound for that kind of thing. So how do you go about building a sound for smoke that has characteristics and movement to it from scratch there, I'm assuming? Gavin, I'm sure the mixing of that was very difficult. Paul, maybe you want to talk about the sounds first?
Yeah, when we started Smoker, like the big MO that we were told, like I'd say, the bold print, this is what we shouldn't do. They're like, we don't want it to sound like fire. Like that was our number one thing. They're like, it can't sound like it's fire, which, that's kind of what your go-to instinct is. At least that was my go-to instinct. I was like, okay, well, smoke doesn't make a sound, and smoke is just air with particles in it, right? So we're like, what are we going to do for that? And so we abandoned quickly anything that involved fire, at least in like the kind of classical sense of like, blow torches or flamethrowers and that kind of stuff. Anything that had that kind of that flamey, crackly sound, like that was off the table. And we started getting creative on stuff. We kind of looked for sounds that would evoke some kind of danger. That was the thing that came up a lot too. They're like, he needs to feel dangerous. Like this guy needs to feel like
he does.
Like, at any moment in time, like he could do a move and it's gonna just annihilate whoever he's attacked. Like he's supposed to just be kind of this all powerful figure the first time you meet him. And so we needed to have something that had oomph, something that had that. And so we explored a bunch of different sounds, and you find some kind of sounds like for like when his head turns into smoke and then reconstitutes. I think there was like a bunch of different textures in there. One of them was like a sand sound that we pitched down so it didn't sound like crispy like sand did, but it had that kind of grainy kind of, there was some kind of texture to it. We ended up using not fire sounds, but I used a lot of like ember sounds, like smoldering. I don't know if you've been to like a campsite at the end of the day when like the fire is dead, but it's just like this like red hot embers. And my wife and I do a lot of camping, and so I got a lot of recordings of this kind of pouring out the fire at the end of the night, and that makes a really cool sound because often there's like a bed of ash on top of the embers. So when you pour water on it, it's got this kind of like sizzly energy release sound, but it doesn't sound like water because like the ashes kind of like dampens it. It kind of like muffles a bit of those splashier sounds. So I used a lot of that. That was one of the first kind of, aha moments when I found that sound. I was like, this evokes heat and danger and whatever without actually sounding anything like a flame. There was no fire element to that. And so from there, you built it out. Some of the bigger moments, like the punches, when he does like his big punch at Sanji, a lot of that's nothing to do with fire or smoke. It's just like a huge punch that you're trying to find one that has more of like, a low end or something that has something that just sounds different than a normal punch. And then you layer on other ingredients to kind of give it a bit more of that smoky feeling. When he like disappears and then he teleports and then smashes Luffy's face in, that was, the same kind of thing. It's like, you kind of find, the beginning and the end, and then that's going to, sell the action. And then the middle, you kind of find something that's in that kind of, smoky department. So no, that was kind of, there wasn't really one category of sound I can point to more so than just like embers. That was a lot of it. And like steam was another ingredient we played with a bit. We wanted anything that felt like, danger. Like if you were to hear that sound in real life, you're like, oh, I don't want to get near that. Like that's the kind of feeling we wanted to evoke from him. So yeah, that was kind of our starting point. And as always, you go down the rabbit hole, you find sounds that are not related to that at all. But that was the gist of it.
And you guys had done well for the movement stuff where things pass by your head, or where his
those moments,
arms are going out behind you and stuff like that.
That was a totally different moment. Yeah. So like when he's there and his arms are up and the tendrils are flying out, that was that was totally different sound palette from the rest of the stuff, actually, because that one they're like.
But even on the ground, what was good was, I was going to say, was the phasey sounds. They're sort of like the Doppler-y ones really helped with movement, especially as as we're panning stuff around. So
yeah, and I guess like to touch on that, like that's with a lot of these sounds, it's like, steam is kind of boring of a sound. When you hear like steam, it's like it's noise, so like, when you're designing these moments, that's the enemy. You're like, how do we make sure this doesn't just come across as noise when you put the fader up? And so as Gavin touched on, we did a lot of processing of stuff. You'd put it through a flanger, you'd put it through, I used a lot of sound particles for him as well. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with that program, but it's like, you can program it with sounds, and you can tell it to, like, you can make like a sound emitter. And so I put a bunch of these kind of sounds through there, and then they'd fire out as you kind of design the physics of it. And then it like kind of, it emulates what that would do. So it does the movement, it does the Doppler. And so I would do a lot of that kind of stuff for different ingredients. And then I'd use that as like a raw element that I'd then do something else with. So yeah, another one I did a lot with actually was Spin Tracer, which is it's one of my tricks up my sleeve. It's kind of a Doppler plugin, and I use it in a way that, well, I don't know if it's designed to, but if you can use it to actually perform Doppler. So if you phase align it's normally two nodes. Getting kind of geek now, but if you can phase align them, so then you can just grab them and move them around. And it doesn't just do panning; it actually does Doppler, and you can actually control how much Doppler it does. So I kind of build these somewhat static sounds, or I find these static sounds, and I'd put them through here. I'd say, you're performing it with your mouse, and recording that, in real time, your performance, and then that becomes one of the ingredients you're putting to a picture. So there was kind of a lot of that of like, find the cool sound. Okay, the sound sounds kind of boring, or sounds kind of noisy, or just sounds like static. How do we make it more interesting? How do we modulate it? How do we make it just move? How do we make it have impact? And for the the scene when Smokers has his arms up and all the tendrils were flying out, originally we had done a pass on that was totally different than what ended up in the final thing. I don't even know if Gavin, you might have heard that version. I'm not sure. I might have gotten killed before it got to you. But there was a version where we had, we wanted it to sound like, this was his kind of his fatality move, basically. So we had all these voices, like these kind of like, that would kind of align with all the different movements, this kind of breathy thing. I thought it was really cool. It gave this bass to it. It gave this kind of something human to it. It didn't just sound like energy. There was some other ingredient to it. And immediately the producers were like, this sounds like a Dementor. No, we're going to kill that. And I was like, all right. And they were right in the end, to give them credit. It did kind of, I went back and listened to a Dementor scene, and I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty much what that is. So we killed that. And in the end, that one was a lot of like rocket and fireworks sounds, because we wanted to have like that propulsion. So, there's some great sound libraries out there of like bottle rockets and that kind of stuff. And so the spinners, the firecrackers, those are really great because they have a lot of movement baked into them. So I'd use those sounds, and you'd kind of, you'd put it through a Doppler, you put it through one of those plugins I mentioned, and it transforms it in a way that you didn't expect. And you kind of find, okay, this one can go there, and this one can go for the arm stretch, and this one can go for, when he slams them or whatever. And you kind of build it, like a puzzle piece in a way.
Gavin, do you want to talk about mixing that scene?
That would probably be a scene where the masters on the effects probably did the loudest or the largest, up fader, down fader thing. And that's only because there's such broadband sounds. You played out the scene. Obviously, when I premixed it, I didn't have the music in. I don't even play. I keep the temp just in the background, but so I'm listening to it, and it sounds great, just those sounds. But then when you start to ask that to play along with the other elements, like being the score and the dialogue and stuff like that, some of it takes up a lot of space. So there'd be a lot of like, and then it takes a dive for the line of dialogue and then comes back up again. So movement wise, it should be the same level, but there's no way for that to live with all the other elements in there. So there was a lot of up and downs on the masters during those scenes. Once again, tons of panning on his anything I could get out of the center channel was made my life a lot easier.
So we have a question from Eugen. I believe that's how it would be pronounced. Eugen, why is the panning not already happened during the editing process?
Paul and his team need a bit of a break. There are a lot of elements, and some of it's being built in layers by multiple editors. And so for one person to be panning it and someone else to be panning it in their room, it wouldn't really work out too well if it got to me and the pans weren't aligned. So it's a lot easier for me to pan and then copy my pans across to similar elements or elements that are doing the same movement. So I think that's part of it. I think it's just a time constraint too. I don't think Paul's team would have the time to do that and still breathe, so.
I mean, the other element too is, here in my studio, I do have a 5-1 setup, but like I normally treat panning as a mixer's job, unless it's like a one-man band where I'm kind of, overseeing the whole thing to the very end and there's no mixer involved, which is very rare. But on this show, I was like, I know Gavin's going to be like, I know he's going to be all over that. So I was like, there's no point in me getting involved. There's no point in me doing a temp pan that Gavin's going to do a more refined version of later. And the other thing too, I'm editing in 5-1 here. Realistically LCR for the most part. Gavin's mixing in Atmos. So,
yeah, we're 714.
What's that? Oh, 714. Right. So for me, even if I did pannings here, it doesn't really make sense because Gavin's going to be doing like the Atmos panner. I don't even know how that would work. If I did a pan in my 5-1, if you'd even be able to make use of that in any efficient way.
Just workflow wise, I just think it was the only way to do it was for it to happen. Well, even if every one of the editors had a 714 setup, I don't think they would have found the time. And I think it was perfectly fine. I don't think you can expect it to happen at that part of the process. And like Paul said, for editors that are doing, turnkey sort of deliverables, sure. While you're editing, do you want to do the pan? That's great. But these are, how many total editors were you guys, Paul?
Sound effects editors, we were 3, sometimes 4, and then other departments was more.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people. It's the only place that it's all gonna, finally get assembled is here at the mix room, and that's the best place to be making those judgment calls.
I will say there were moments. I think the sword fight may have been one moment when I did actually do a little bit of panning. But it was fully with the expectation that it was going to be thrown away. Like I did it for myself so that, sometimes there's too many sounds happening at the same place. I'm like, I need to know if I need more. I need to know if this is working, in tandem with, because sometimes the events is like smash, boom, bang, can, it's like a lot of really fast events. And if they're kind of stacked in the mono, it's hard for me to judge if it's all playing the way that I expect it to, or the way that I hope it will play when Gavin's finished mixing it. So there's moments when I'll temp in a pan just to be like, okay, like, does that clear enough space for the next sound? Yes, that does. Or I got to move that one later now or whatever, just to kind of build it into the choreography of the edit. But really it's something that I'm assuming and hoping it's going to be thrown away later. It's just for me to help kind of have some clarity on the soundstage.
Yeah, I find that that process is different on every project with every team. And that's something you have to figure out with your re-recording mixer ahead of time. Because I've done projects where I've done a ton of panning and then the mixer didn't even import the panning automation. Like not only did you not throw it out, you never heard it to begin with. And then I've had other projects where the mixer expects, not perfect panning, but me to be giving him ideas of where things should be. A lot of work can be saved with a simple conversation at the beginning of the project to know if you should be doing any panning or not, and just have everyone on the same page. Next question. This one's from Anonymous. How much time did you have per episode?
For me, we pretty much had about a calendar month, from when we were more or less given our picture lock to when we more or less had to start getting ready to deliver for premixes for Gavin. We were multiple people on the episode, so it wasn't everybody full time for a month. For me, it was about 20 to 25 days an episode, for my sound design, my sound supervision, whatever else had to happen. For our editors, I think we had a total of 20 days of sound effects editing per episode, maybe 25 for some of the bigger episodes. Sometimes we would do the thing where we steal from one episode to give to the other, because not every episode has, 100 kills in a sword fight, like one episode, like the chopper episode, for sound effects was actually extremely straightforward. There was other challenges in ADR and other stuff like that, but that was actually a very simple episode for sound design. And so we're like, okay, we only need 8 days or 7 days on that episode, so we're going to steal the other 9 or whatever we had, and we're going to give it to episode 5, which was a challenging one, or 8 or whatever.
And same thing with personnel, right, Paul? You guys had sometimes you had more editors on one episode.
Exactly. Yes, I would stack them, and like, I guess that's part of the job of a sound super, or at least I view that's part of my job, is you're kind of trying to strategically play your team to their strengths, and you're trying to, everyone's pretty much freelance on the show, so not everybody's available all the time either. So you're trying to juggle schedules. You're trying to say, okay, well, this person's really great at this kind of thing, so I'm going to put them on the fights. And there's a fight in this episode and that episode, and then this person's really great at ambiences. This person's really, so you kind of you're trying to play your team as best as you can, and that involves juggling time. That involves juggling, what tasks you put them on.
Next question. This is referring back to when you said on the playbacks there was 15 people in the room. So I'm curious, when there are so many people in the room, who has the final say, and what happens when there's a major disagreement? Maybe Gavin, do you want to tackle how you conduct the room with so many people involved?
Well, I'd like to say that I have final say, but that's really not the case.
Not you or me.
we have multiple exec producers, then we have co-exec producers, then we have producers, then we have associate producers. First of all, it wasn't one room. It was, so we had on the first playback for 203, we had Montreal, we had people at Netflix listening in 712, I think was for Netflix. Then there were people at Warner's listening that would listen to the 714, and then there were people in South Africa that were listening to a 5.1 Source Connect link. We modified that as the people moved around the world and stuff like that. And then we'd usually have 1 or 2 producers traveling that were listening on earbuds or on laptops or whatever. And so like just to a stereo feed on Source Live. And so there was a lot of different listening positions and stuff like that. I mean, they all have most of the comments were story based. It wasn't like, hey, could that be fatter or that be thinner? Sometimes it was, but most of the time their stuff was, that's getting in the way of the dialogue, or that's, should that sound like that? It was more of a contextual thing than it was sort of a level or even timbre sort of thing. So it was. Who would have the final say? There was a pecking order. There was a very established pecking order of who got final say and who got to make comments and who should just be shut up and sit in the back of the room and stuff like that. But it was by the end we'd kind of all figured it out. Just a silly anecdote. We did 8 episodes of playback. I never was on the Zoom calls that were talking about stuff. On the last day, after having spent 5 months together, the exec producer said, "Can Adam move that around?" And it's like, oh, they don't even know my name. That's okay. So,
wow,
it's your alter ego.
Yeah.
No, I mean, just to add to that, I generally speaking on this show, I mean, maybe this is not the case all the time. Maybe we got really lucky, but the producers were all very friendly with each other. Like they all knew they were playing on the same team. They all knew, even if they disagreed on something, there was a lot of, a lot of times you'd see that they'd make a point, and then as soon as somebody was like, oh, well, I disagree, I think that, they'd be like, okay, then forget about it. It's like there was a lot of this kind of, I think there was a lot of innate trust between the producers, so that, they were all trying to get their notes in that they cared about. But as soon as there was a conflicting, or somebody disagreed, or somebody felt strongly the other way, they were pretty quick to be like, okay, don't worry about it. Like, that's, if you feel strongly about it, then we're not going to go there. And so, for our side of things, we would kind of just like sit back in these moments, say that, we are mere mortals. These are, we're going to let them duke it out in the heavens. And then whatever the decision gets rendered, we will perform it, so that was kind of how most of these things went down.
Paul and Stephen Welke would take notes on everything, and then we'd go through it chronologically. And I mean, it wasn't 5 minutes of touch-ups. It was hours of this tweak and that tweak. And sometimes it was, let's find the solution that fixes both these problems. Because sometimes it was, it's like, well, he thought it was too dark and he thought it was too bright. And it's like, okay, well, let's find something that's in the middle of it. So,
how many audio pros were on the biggest show that you worked on? Like, what was the size of the team that you ended up with at its largest?
Well, we had 4 editors, including me. We had dialogue, ADR editor, Foley editor. I mean, I don't know where you want to stop counting because there's Foley artists. There's a lot of boundaries that's not really editorial, but editorially, we had loop group editor. We had, I'd say something around 10 people was kind of our core editorial team.
And then two to three on the mixed stage. So
yeah, that's right. We had a couple of really great assistant editors as well who'd help us with all the conforms and VFX updates and kind of chasing the picture that was constantly moving, which was its own can of worms on the show. But I'd say somewhere between, let's say, 10 and 15 at its max, if you include the mix stage and assistants and Foley people. And yeah.
And then there's the whole support staff to that, which are coordinators, but they're not touching the audio in any way. So.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mix this on your own, right? This is a one-person mix?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'd do that again, but yeah. We have to talk about next year. but yeah, it was a challenge, but it was also, it's easier to keep control of it and know where everything is. Like getting to the touch-ups was fairly quick, I think, for the most part. And Paul was always sort of right behind me or right beside me. So if I was searching for something or I was sleep deprived or whatever, then we tried to alternate our sleep deprivation days. Yeah.
Didn't work very well.
Didn't work very well. Because you were 6 days out of 7, and I was 7 days out of 7.
Yeah, that's it. On that one magical day, though,
everything clicked. Yeah.
You keep mentioning season 3. Is that official? Is there a season 3, or we got to cut this out?
I'm actually starting that. I'm already starting some preliminary sound design on that, which I cannot talk about. But
no, of course,
it's really
that's
fun.
Great.
It's really fun. I mean, it's something that I think the fans are going to love. It's for sound design. It's another creative playground, totally different sound palette than season 2, which is really fun. So, in a certain way, it's back to the drawing board, but in a certain way, it's also like, let's get the ideas brewing and let's see where this takes us.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the success of season 2, and we're all looking forward to season 3. Thanks for joining me today. This was a fun talk. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to you, Tim. And thanks to everyone that tuned in today, which is really great.
Thanks, everybody.
Sound Ideas had a great time at NAB this year, connecting with professionals across media, post-production, and broadcast. They've launched a limited-time NAB sale around the event, offering 50% off their catalog of professional sound effect libraries. Due to strong interest, that sale has now been extended for a limited time. So even though NAB is wrapped, there's still a chance to take advantage of the savings, but not for long. You can check out the extended sale at sound-ideas.com. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.